Julius Caesar is one of Shakespeare's most well-known plays, with its first performance thought to have occurred in 1599 or thereabouts. Despite being the title character of the work, Julius Caesar himself is not the central performer of the play. Rather, he is the focal point upon which the plot pivots. It explores themes of duty, honour, patriotism, loyalty, ambition, and the very nature of power itself. The play has been contended by many scholars to have been written during the final years of Queen Elizabeth I's reign, when the once all-powerful monarch was failing in her advanced years, refusing to name an heir, where the memories of the War of the Roses still lingered within the collective nightmare of the English people. The population were fearful that if the Queen was to suddenly die without naming a successor, that the kingdom would descend into a civil war like the one that had finally consumed the dying days of the Roman Republic. Shakespeare not only crystallised these concerns, but also illustrated what can happen not only to would-be despots, but to those who would seek to usurp and murder in the name of freedom and justice, but in truth only seek to feed their own ambitions and take their vengeance against every petty perceived slight they had suffered. These are reflections of both history and fiction, yet they were also the concerns of the people of that time, who feared that the nobles of England would once again wage war against each other for the throne, fanning the flames of patriotism for their own end whilst the kingdom burnt to ash. Where those with true love of their country would be manipulated by those with envy and ambition, like how Cassius turned Brutus, transforming a man who idolized justice and always carried the love of Rome and her republic into history's greatest traitor by making him part of the murder of Caesar on the premise of tyranny. And so with that, the And the Geek Shall Collective presents the Ides of March, Julius Caesar, Commander, Deck Tech. The primary themes that the deck takes from the play are the ideas of tyranny, revenge, and justice, specifically that Brutus, despite his vile betrayal, is oft referred to as someone with an unimpeachable sense of justice who was led astray by jealous plotters, using Brutus's fear of Caesar becoming a tyrant to turn him into their pawn. The deck makes use of the little-remembered enchantment, soothsaying, to affect the use of dreams and prophecy, and manipulate your deck, sculpting it to your needs and curves. It also makes use of baneful omens, to represent the dire warnings that Caesar ignored before the Ides of March. The deck also uses a monarch mechanic from Conspiracy 2 for both flavour and card draw. Whilst it does incentivize your opponents to attack you, the game can turn into a brawl for all when someone else becomes a monarch and everyone else wants that sweet, sweet monarchical card draw. Tokens play a major part within the deck, being used as chump blockers and sack fodder while you build up your board presence. 4 types of tokens are used, the primary of these being zombies, but there are also Mir, created through the Shrine of Loyal Legions to represent the loyal citizens of Rome, while soldier and vampire tokens represent the powerful Roman military and the elite veterans that Mark Antony commanded. The deck also uses justice-themed cards such as Harsh Justice, Urborg Justice, and Karmic Justice to echo the themes of justice within the play. Functionally, the 3 aforementioned cards help prevent opponents from attacking you, or punishing them once they have attacked you by either dealing direct damage to them, or causing them to sacrifice their own creatures for each one of yours that was destroyed. Finally, with Dakkon Bladeblade being the commander who represents Caesar, the deck uses many ways to drop lands onto the battlefield as it can without becoming a landfall deck. This choice was followed to illustrate the Roman Republic's desire for conquest that led to Caesar's position of power, that then led to his murder. To this end, the deck utilizes creatures and artifacts that can help get as much land on the battlefield as quickly as possible, as well as take them from your opponents, such as using creatures like Herald of Lashrek or Oblivion Sower. One of the main things that makes this deck more unique is the scry engine that it has, using Viscera Seer for single scry and Soothsaying do a mass shift of cards, setting up an effective stack order so you can best take advantage of your mana curve. The land drop engine is also fairly unique for an Esper and non-landfall deck, using Druidic Saddle, Weathered Wayfarer, and Walking Atlas to get multiple land drops per turn. This can be a slow process, but the deck packs enough pillow forting and removal spells that you can afford to let the games go along if you want to win with Dakkon alone. This deck also combines mechanics from the 2 conspiracy sets, Will of the Council, Council's Dilemma, and the Monarch, to try and force your opponents to attack each other for how they voted and desiring the card draw from being the Monarch. In a multiplayer match, this can allow you to build up your field until you can unleash Dakkon's might. Yet what truly makes this deck unique is how it uses creatures and planeswalkers to represent figures who are simultaneously literary and historical. It would and should take another video to draw parallels between the cards, the characters, and the historical figures for which they were chosen. Much time and effort was put in by our team to find not only the best card-bound avatars for the characters, but also ones who would work synergistically within the deck with of the other creatures and spells. These representations may not be entirely accurate, with little depth being taken here and there in order to fit in an ability or mechanic, but we've attempted to be as close to the play as possible in terms of using these cards that reflect characters and themes. It is apart from having Isamaru, Hound of Konda, the Dog of War, because that is just a little flavour joke we thought we would add. The main aim of the deck is to amass enough lands to make Dakkon Bladeblade an utter threat, killing via commanded damage whilst being protected by Swiftfoot Boots and made unblockable by Rogue's Passage. In order to achieve this, the deck runs a suite of single removal spells like Sword to Plowshares and Hero's Downfall, pseudo-sweepers like Eliminate the Competition, and pillow fort spells like Authority of the Consoles and Consulate Crackdown. The deck also takes advantage of Will of the Council mechanics and spells like Plea for Power and Council's Judgment in order to ensure the opponent spend more time squabbling with each other than attacking you. Finally, the deck creates a token horde to protect you and your important creatures, act as fuel for Eliminate the Competition, and as an alternative win con when combined with Ansem effects. The primary win con for this deck is to stall out your opponent using Authority of the Consoles, Karmic Justice, Grand Arbiter Augustine IV, Consulate Crackdown, and a Baneful Omen until you can get enough lands down to make Dakkon a viable threat with commander damage. The secondary win con has created an overwhelming force of tokens, buffed by Anthem effects, able to take out your opponents by having so many tokens and creatures that they cannot be blocked. Conversely, you can sacrifice your tokens to eliminate the competition in order to clear the board for an alpha strike. You can even double this effect by sacrificing your tokens and casting Urborg Justice immediately after casting and eliminate the competition, so it goes on top of the stack. Your opponent is forced to choose which creatures to sacrifice, leaving the rest be taken out for the resolving Eliminate the Competition. The final primary win con is the deck is rushing out It That Betrays, combining it with Oblivion Sower and Herald of Leshek to starve your opponents of permanents, especially their lands. You can make use of the gods Athros, God of Passage, and Afara, God of Polis, in the creature forms to block and use their abilities, especially Asora's ability to return creatures to your hand so they can recast, and you can use their ETB effects over again. Scrying an unusual method of card draw, specifically the use of Soothsaying and Viscera Seer combined with increasing ambition and Sphinx's Revelation. Token generation with Army of the Damned, Endless Ranks of the Dead, Grave Titan, Shrine of Loyal Legions, and Mobilization, and to a lesser extent using Druidic Satchel to create sapling tokens, although this is more of a random effect. The use of Anthem through enchantments like Glorious Anthem and Martial Anthem, as well as Ravos Soultender's passive buff ability. Using unconventional means to put lands on the side of your field, such as using artifacts as Druidic Satchel and Explorer Scope and creatures like Herald of Leshrac. How the creatures often synergize with each other, the abilities enhancing or affecting others give more strategies to work with, the control aspects of the game, either through using mechanics like Will of the Council or Council's Dilemma, spells that are counters or spot removals, or recursion through Aseroth God of Passage, Ravos Soultender, or Martial Anthem's kick ability. The deck is weak to board wipe, especially if you don't have many counter spells handy. If your token spells get countered or your tokens removed in any way, you'll often be left to your opponent's whims. You have no unconditional board wipe, so the deck is weak to zoo and token strategies. Having Herald of Leshrac removed, exiled, or if your opponent somehow run out of land, you can cripple your land boosting strategy, weakening Dakkon if he's already out in the field. Many Euro counters and removal of the line either sacrificing your own creatures or tokens or having permanents destroyed. So they can be disadvantaged if you don't have much of a board presence to use spells like Urborg Justice or Eliminate the Competition properly. You're vulnerable to any deck with flying creatures, and the lack of flying only removal spells, since this tends to be a green mechanic. So expect any games against anything with flying creatures not to go your way. Voting spells like Will of the Council seldom go your way, and many opponents can use them to remove non-threatening permanents or deny you extra turns. Tide votes always go to lesser options, so in multiplayer games this is most likely to be used against you. Cards that give you land advantage are most vital: Oblivion Sower, Herald of Leshrac, Walking Atlas, Explorer Scope, and Druidic Satchel, along with the EDH staple of Sword of the Animus rounding off the land play package. Your taxing and prison effects like Authority of the Console, Kambal, Consul of Allocation, and Karmic Justice are vital to slow down your opponents, sap them of life, and give you a buffer against more aggressive styles and players. Your removal spells, which include Tragic Arrogance, Hero's Downfall, Urborg Justice, and Murder. Your token generators, especially Army of the Damned, because it's able to be flashbacked, and Endless Ranks of the Dead to keep up a buffer around you that makes it harder for your opponents to deal with outside of absolute board wipes. Soothsaying allows you to sculpt the top of your deck as you go up your mana curve, but find yourself having poor draws, essentially allowing you to further curve into the cards that you need when you need them. It also allows you to shuffle your deck if you're finding your cards being clumped or you're being hit by a tuck effect. Viscera Seer also helps you sculpt the top of your deck, especially if you have token fodder to do so easily before your turn begins. It that Betray steals your opponent's permanents, especially their lands. The Triad of Fate is important because of their removal abilities, as well as you letting them blink your EBT creatures or protect your important ones from board wipes, as well as remove troublesome creatures your opponents command at the cost of giving them 2 cards per removal. Depending on what type of decks you are facing, you want to prioritise getting your land dropping spells played as soon as you are able, as well as getting your card draw engines online. Seer's Sundial can be handy, but this is more important mid-game when you can spare the mana for the draw. Ideally, you want an opening hand with at least one of each colour or dual lands that come in untapped, as well as either Ishimaru, Hound of Condor, or Crypt Breaker so they can attack or block by the second turn. Weathered Wayfarer is also an ideal opening hand card, especially if you think you may be mana screwed or you know that you're facing at least one land ramp deck. You also want Authority of the Consoles in your opening hand, so you can put it down as soon as you can. Prioritise this over low drop creatures because you want the life gain and to make your opponent's creature enter tapped, more so if they have haste or a utility creature that can be activated immediately. In the same vein, you want Campbell Console of Allocations drawn early because of his taxing effect and to give yourself a life buffer, more so against artifact or equipment heavy commanders like Breya, Sidri or Kemba. Playing Grand Arbiter Augustine IV by your 4th turn is also important because it reduces the cost of most of your spells and taxes opponents early game, slowing them down. Guafa Hazid Profiteer is also best played early so you can take advantage of his bribery effect. You may give your opponents minor card advantage but a small price to pay for preventing creatures from able to attack or block. Finally, in terms of prison and tax effect, Kalitas, Traitor of Get, is best played early game if you have him in hand. Not only does he prevent any Grainyard recursion decks, but also gives you tokens to use as sack fodder or to make Kalitas bigger a threat mid to late game. Having Soothsaying down as early as possible helps you sculpt the top of your deck and draw into your curve if you're stuck with poor top deck options. Your Anthem effect should also be online as early as you can, but save Marshal's Anthem for more mid-game for its kicker ability. This is important if you're facing a slow but powerful deck, or you know that at least one of your opponents love their board wipes. Athros, God of Passage, should be played before turn 5, at the point your opponents might be more willing to pay life to prevent some of your more troublesome low-drop creatures from being played again. Ifera, God of the Polis, is also a good play if you have the mana and can drop low-cost creatures or put tokens that increase your hand size and options. It is best to get Shrine of Loyal Legions on the battlefield as soon as you feasibly can, more so if you are flush with white spells and mana to get each counter upon it. Don't be afraid to pop it early if you have the mana to prevent an opponent from stomping you with an early, powerful creature. Once you reach the mid-game, you'll want to have everything that can help you drop multiple lands per turn. You should also play Herald of Leshrac and Oblivion Sower as soon as you are able. A Herald allows you to sap your opponents of their ability to cast spells, the Sower gives you a strong blocker. The use of the indestructible nature of your 2 gods to block larger creatures your opponents may throw at you. Try not to get them exiled, so flicker them with the Triad of Fate if you see an exile coming. They are safe from non-exile board wipes, and Atheros can help you rebuild your side quickly if you aren't forced to discard because of your over the hand limit. Once you have enough mana available, it's best to cast Army of the Damned to give yourself a strong board presence and have fodder for any sacrifice effects, there will any chump blockers to spare. Don't flush it back on your next turn. Simply keep it tucked sideways into your graveyard so you remember it's there to cast and use it at its most opportune moment. Use your spells that have Will of the Council or Council Dilemma's effects on them to remove creatures, permanents, or control your opponents. Though take an extra turn spell that better left to the late game when you have the battlefield presence to take advantage of them. Cast Consulate Crackdown to exile your opponent's artifacts, especially their mana rocks, to kill their ramping ability. Depending on what sort of deck you're facing, you might be better to save this for late game, but against strong artifact decks like Breya, casting mid-game could be your best way to exile any strong threats and break future combos. Increasing Ambition is best saved for mid-game when you need to seek out your own win cons or find answers for threats. Its high cost makes it difficult to cast early game, but its flashback bonus makes it worthy to include on top of the fact it fits the theme of the deck. Cast the creatures that make you the monarch and then pillow fort yourself behind your tokens. This is less about the card draw and more about using the abilities being the monarch grants you through creatures like Keeper of the Keys, which makes all of your creatures unblockable for a turn. If you have the mana, cast Baneful Omens and use Soothsaying Scrying ability before the end of your turns so you can sculpt the top of your deck, draining your opponents for high amounts of life with high CMC cards. This will make you a target for everyone at the table, but if you have a nice life buffer, this shouldn't be an issue. Play all of your planeswalkers, protecting them so you can get to the ultimate late game. Use Sorin's second ability to remove mid-range creatures and gain life back to give yourself a decent damage buffer if you need it. Do not ult Gideon Ally of Justice, because it will set you back too far if your opponents still have a lot of life and can protect their permanents, such as casting, Teferi's Protection, to flicker everything off their side of the field. Since your main win condition is to slam into your opponents as hard as you can with as many creatures as you can, your overall options are limited. So it's best to focus on taking the extra turns via Plea for Power and Expropriate and taxing effects to get everyone low enough that you can hit for lethal easily. By this stage of the game, you should have enough land to make Dakkon a credible threat, or at least make him lethal for one opponent via commander damage. It's best to play him post-board wipe that an opponent has cast. At 6 CMC, it is very expensive to have constantly recast. So it's best to cast him once when you can either go for a lethal on a cleared field or make him unblockable to take out someone. You eliminate the competition to clear the field, sacrificing your amassed tokens. Since it's a sorcery spell, you can't use it to react to a one-sided board wipe. You can also use creatures that betrays takes from your opponents to save your own tokens, and creatures from being sacrificed. If you have Kalitas on the field, it can prevent any spell that bring all creatures back to the field under your opponent's control, such as Rise of the Dark Realms. If you are the Monarch and have Keeper of the Keys on field, strike with unblockable creatures. If you have all your Anthem effects online and a large token army, you can potentially strike multiple opponents for lethal, barring them having any mass removal spells. If all else has failed, and he is still on the field, use Gideon, Ally of Justice's ultimate ability to wipe the board clean, and then use him to win via chip damage. If your opponents can flicker or protect their permanents, this will leave you open for annihilation. Like the themes of the play, this deck is political in nature, but not in the usual way. You are throwing choices at your opponents so they are forced to argue and fight amongst themselves, so hopefully they won't join forces like the conspirators did and end the game with your assassination. The removal spell Tragic Arrogance is oft-times confusing due to its wording. So remember, it affects every player on the field, including yourself, so only play it when you can afford to lose enchantments, creatures and artifacts and planeswalkers. Despite being a mid-range control style deck, your playstyle with it is still fairly linear with limited win cons. This must be kept in mind at all times as you lay out your plays, replies and strategies. You still have multiple options for how you play the deck, but it tends to move in a limited form, giving you very few endgame options. Use Weathered Wayfarer as often as you need. It can help you greatly if you're mana screwed or facing an aggressive land ramp or landfall deck or commanders like the Gitrog monster. Conversely, use Walking Atlas if you have excess land in hand. Use it during your opponent's end step to drop your non-basic lands, especially those that enter the battlefield tapped. Remember, any land that Walking Atlas puts onto the battlefield still has its ETB effects trigger, so bounce lands bounce and the other lands do what they have to do. If you have the opportunity to drop big creatures like It That Betrays early, do so. Long games that drag out are what you want to avoid. Reversely, if you have set yourself up well in terms of board presence, and your opponent looks to be milled out by themselves or others, or pinged by large amounts of life damage each turn, then you can afford to drag out the game, providing that you can protect long term with your tokens or prison effects. If you have a large enough buffer of life points, do not be afraid to let your opponent attack us through so you can use Harsh Justice to burn them for the damage they dealt you. This is good to mid-late game strategy if you manage to hold on to your life points and one of your opponents is below 20 life. And that was our Julius Caesar deck tech, the second of our Shakespeare-inspired decks. We shall be continuing our Shakespeare series soon, focusing rather on his works of history and tragedy than on his comedies. The play of Hamlet shall be the next one we build around, but our next Commander deck tech shall be a mono-white hate deck that one of our members has been putting a lot of work into building and testing. If you have any thoughts on how the deck reflects or fails to reflect the themes and characters of the play, feel free to leave a comment in the section below, and please do all the stuff that other channels ask you to do if you are so inclined. The deck list and other links are below. Let us know if you'd like a video on how the cards represent the characters and historical figures that they are based upon. This channel is looking to branch out in range of deck techs in 2018, incorporating the modern format as well as other TCG products such as Yu-Gi-Oh! And the Bushy Road range. Until then, we wish you all the best.